Hey folks, Blackcross here with a top 10 of Bloodborne bosses. The last top 10 boss video that I did with Dark Souls, and with the fact that I completed Bloodborne with the DLC packs, I can officially do a proper top 10 of my favorite bosses in Bloodborne. Just like with the last one, the rules do apply on this one as well with the no repeated bosses. Unfortunately, that's where it gets difficult. See, unfortunately, in Bloodborne, especially in the Chalice dungeons, you will fight a lot of repeated bosses. So, in other words, there will be some. So, in other words, I'm going to be picking one boss that is exclusively only appearing in the Chalice dungeons. All the other bosses that is within the main playthrough do not count as a one-choice Chalice dungeon. In other words, if I was to pick the Watcher of the Old Lords, that would be the one exception of the rule of repeated bosses, because he is exclusively in the Chalice dungeons only. Whereas every other boss that only appears in the Chalice dungeons, but also appear in the main game, do not count in that one exception. As for the others, as for the rest of the countdown, any boss that are considered to be repeated reoccurrences do not count. In other words, say like the Shadow of Yharnam. They do not count because they reappear as regular enemies. So isn't that weird, huh? Also, too, the first position, which is number 10, is going to be the only time I'm going to be breaking this rule. For certain reasons, as you will find out. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the countdown now. Like, right now. Like, right the frick now! Number 10 will be going to the Cleric Beast. I know a lot of people would say Lawrence, the first Fitcar, because technically he is a reskin of the Cleric Beast. Unfortunately, that's where I have to disagree. I mean, yeah, he is technically a lot more interesting considering he has a lot more movesets, but no. The Cleric Beast is technically the first boss that you will encounter, mostly because he is the very first optional boss you technically will fight. And the funny thing is, you can fight him any time in the game, whether it be right at the very beginning or after the moon sets in, which is basically where all of the commercial advertisement shows is him during the nighttime scenes. Which is interesting because if you fight him in the nighttime, he's actually the most easiest enemy you will fight in the game. But with that being said, the Cleric Beast is actually the most interesting enemy because of the fact that it can open up a road of a shortcut. If for some reason you beat the Cleric Beast, you will unlock the Cleric Hunter badge, which allows you to not only attain the Kirk Hammer, but it will also allow you to attain the Hunter Chief emblem, which will allow you to open up a secret gateway, which will proceed onward to Fitcar Amelia's boss chamber room. Not to mention, it's actually a lot cooler than the Lawrence boss look. I'm sorry, I know fire makes things a lot cooler, but in this case, it does not. Number 9 goes to Living Failures. For someone that's technically classified as Living Failures, they certainly are a lot better than the actual boss known as Celestial Emissaries. The Celestial Emissary boss fight is probably one of the less interesting, mostly because it takes on the form of an actual enemy that you fight in the actual game itself later on. Especially if you're in like the Forbidden Woods and right before you get ready for the boss chamber. So technically you have fought and you already know what to deal with. Then they spawn a lot of them. And really, to be honest, if you can avoid the Arcana attacks, this is actually an easy boss to fight. The Living Failures, on the other hand, are an exception to this one. I mean, yeah, they may be called Living Failures because they don't have eyes, but unlike this boss, this one is a lot more challenging. They only spawn 4 at a time, which is probably a good thing compared to the Celestial Emissary. But unlike the Celestial Emissary, these things hit hard. And by hit hard, I mean they hit hard. Another thing that's quick to note is that they also have the ability to do arcana attacks as well. Orb attack as well as shooting stars. Now eventually halfway through the fight they also summon up a meteor shower. Apparently they're a descent from Sephiroth. The boss fight itself is actually interesting as well as challenging, for it being the second boss that you fight within the Old Hunter DLC. All honesty, I know a lot of people will probably say this one isn't so interesting, but for me personally, I would prefer to fight the Lilium Failures 10 times than I would the Celestial Emissary, mostly because the interesting attack patterns that they give. That, and there are 4 of them instead of one big one. Number 8 goes to the Watchdogs of the Old Lords. This boss is the one boss that I have chosen from the Chalice Dungeons. The reason is because of his design as well as his uniqueness. Admittedly though, when you get ready to fight this boss the first time through, you're probably a little bit overpowering. But then you go for the Defiled Chalice, and well, trust me whenever I say this, he loves to charge at you. A lot. But that being said, it's actually one of the more interesting bosses that I've actually enjoyed out of the Chalice Dungeons. Would I fight him 100 times? Yeah, of course I would. Would I fight him in the Defiled Chalice over 100 times? Let me think on that and I'll get back to you. But out of all of them, for some reason the Watchdogs of the Old Lord was always the interesting one. Mostly because every other boss is either an enemy that you have previously fought, or they're all Temerian bosses. Which is something that I'm actually kind of curious about the history of. I mean, the one thing we never did understand was the Temerians themselves. Watchdog of the Old Lords definitely makes sense to me. I know this is stupid, but I couldn't think of anything else to say for this boss. Next! Number 7 goes to Airbithia, Daughter of the Cosmos. Trust me whenever I say this, and trust me, I know everyone's going to say, why did you choose this boss? It's the hardest damn boss in the game. And I agree with you. This bitch is the hardest bitch in the game. No exaggeration in fact. But to be honest, ever since using the lock shield, it actually helps out in the entire battle and makes it more of a less of a tedious task and more of an actual strategist fight. And in all honesty, it's kind of a shame because it was considered to be the only boss in the game that was considered to be the hardest. In fact, in every website that I've seen when it comes to hardest boss fights in Bloodborne, Airbithia was considered to be close to the top, if not second to it, before the DLC. And what was the recommendation? Summon as many people as you possibly can. For good reason, because Airbithia will kick your ass. Multiple times. I'm glad that they added a few extra additions within the patch of 1.07, where you get to summon more NPCs, because trust me whenever I say it, the attention of Airbithia, it seems to be drawn towards that NPC when she uses her arcane attack, which is nice, because trust me whenever I say this, you need as much of a distraction as you humanely possibly can. That, and if one of those things hits you, you're more than likely going to die within the second hit. Also, she's an alien. End of story. She is an alien. Do you want to argue with me? She's an alien! Number 6 goes to Ludwig the Accursed. I know whenever I say this, and I say this a lot, Ludwig is a fucking beast! Mostly because of the fact that it hits harder than a fucking truck right in the face. And I say this literally because he charges at you. What's interesting is that Ludwig is one of the very few bosses in the game where you actually have optional NPC summons to choose from. The first one is, of course, Harriet, but if for some reason you were able to meet up with Falter, you get to join the Covenant and actually get to summon him. However, there's actually an additional NPC that you can actually summon within the same area and actually have 2 NPC summons at the same time. So next to Falter, you have the Twin Martyrer. So this not only makes it for an interesting fight, but also makes it for an easier fight. Unfortunately for me, I never did discover that second Confederate member, which led me to just fighting him on my own. Which I have to say I did pretty well, I thought. Besides dying over and over and over and over again. But that's beside the point. The point is that this boss is actually interesting, considering the fact that, well, out of all of the beast transformation, they all took on the form of, like, well, a dog-like creature. This one is the only creature that actually took on the form of a horse. And halfway through the boss fight, it actually transformed into a centaur. Which actually makes it even more interesting, considering he's using the Moonlight Blade. Seriously, that blade can kill you in a matter of seconds if you're not even careful. And trust me whenever I say this, if you thought his first phase was hard, oh, you are so mistaken. His second form is much more harder. In other words, those NPCs will die within seconds. So Ludwig, you were very creative and very well built, but you suck balls.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Number 5 is Father Gascoigne. Gascoigne? 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 I really could never figure out the right pronunciation of his actual name. I think it's Gascoigne, but I may be wrong. Who knows? If anyone can figure out the right pronunciation, please let me know. And second of all, Father Gascoigne is hard when you first fight him. Father Gascoigne is actually probably one of the more difficult bosses that you will fight at the very beginning of the game, especially if you don't go on ahead and beat the Cleric Beast when you first get in the game. Why? Because Father Gascoigne is a bitch. And a half. Very easily so. So why is he number 5? Well, all the hunter fights are actually one of the more interesting boss fights in the game. And Father Gascoigne is actually the first of the boss-like hunters that you fight within the game. The problem is, though, is that halfway through the fight, he actually transforms into a beast. And that can make things even more difficult. Now, technically some people would say use a music boss, but don't. Because if you use him more than twice, he transforms way ahead enough time. And trust me whenever I say this, you don't want him to transform earlier. You want him to transform as late as possible. Trust me, it saves you a lot of trouble. There are a couple areas that he can glitch in and allows you to get a hit from a distance. That is if you have the Hunter Axe. Everything else though, well, you're going to be doing a lot of practicing. But the Hunter Axe is actually one of the more better weapons to use against Father Gascoigne, in my personal opinion. So it's either between the tree or the statue, or right at the edge of where the steps are near the railing. Trust me whenever I say this, these two glitch areas are perfect for taking on Gascoigne. And trust me whenever I say this, when it comes to a game as hard to the walls as this game is, you need as much help as you possibly can. Even if it's just a simple glitch. Trust me, it helps. A lot. Number 4 goes to Murgo's Wet Nurse. This boss is not just interesting in terms of design specs, but as well as a lore aspect as well. Murgo's Wet Nurse is considered to be a guardian to Great Ones. Even though this boss itself is a Great One, that doesn't mean it is considered to be the main Great Ones, as instead it is considered to be a guardian of the birth of a Great One, which is why we see a baby carriage before we actually see the boss itself, meaning that Murgo is actually protecting what could be the born Great One that we see before us. Murgo is probably one of the more interesting as well as one of the more creepiest bosses that you will encounter in the game, because when you first encounter it, it resembles that of a Grim Reaper. With 6 scythe blades, it makes it for a very difficult time to fight it. And it tends to warp around from distant places. And even though it doesn't have energy blasts, it does have this attack, transforming the entire area into a shadow realm and makes a duplicate copy. This will make things a lot more freakier in the long run. But this boss isn't really that bad, especially when you consider the fact that after you play the game for the majority of the time, you will be used to the gameplay mechanics well enough on how to dodge attacks, as well on how to avoid attacking from different enemies. So basically, in other words, Murgo's Wet Nurse isn't really that hard, unless it's your first time. After you defeat Murgo's Wet Nurse, you will attain one of the 4 ability cores which will be needed for the secret ending of the game. Even though you only need 3 of the 4. Number 3 goes to Fitcar Amelia. Out of all the iconic bosses that are in Bloodborne, next to the Cleric Beast, Fitcar Amelia has to be the most well-known boss in the entire game itself. Why? Mostly because, well, you wonder who the heck is she? In fact, whenever I was trying to figure out what a Fitcar is, I thought it was technically a name. But no, Fitcar is basically a title given to those who are basically bishops or leaders of churches. In other words, she is technically a leader of what could very well be the healing church, which would make sense because that's technically where we're at. We're at the bottom of the healing church, or the choir room, wherever you want to consider it at. But Fitcar Amelia is actually one of the more interesting bosses, mostly because of the fact that, well, she has that moan. The moan of pain, and the fact that she continues to carry that amulet everywhere she goes, even after the transformation. In fact, if you do attack the amulet arm enough times, she will get staggered enough to a point to where you'll actually do a physical attack. Later on in the fight, however, she does attain a healing ability, in which case the numbing mist comes into play. So if you're able to attain the numbing mist, use it so she doesn't heal. Just trust me whenever I say this. The second she starts to heal, you're going to be asking for a longer boss fight than it should be. But Fitcar Amelia is definitely one of the more memorable moments within Bloodborne. Next to the Cleric Beast, next to Father Gascoigne, next to, okay, you get my drift, every boss is very memorable to some extent. With the exception of Witch of Hemrick. And that's because that's the easiest boss in the entire game. And that says a lot.
A corpse should be left well alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will cure you now. Liberate you from your wild curiosity.
Number 2 goes to Lady Maria. Lady Maria is by far one of the best bosses within the DLC. She is amazing. She's not just amazing in terms of design, not to mention in terms of the battle itself, but in terms of the lore aspects as well. She is considered to be the student of none other than Gammon, the First Hunter. Not to mention, she's actually related to the Queen of the Foulbloods, which is actually interesting considering the fact that she would use the ability of blood in order to defeat her enemies, as proof of this particular part right here. Makes sense if you ask me. But what's even more interesting is consider the fact that her looks actually matches that of the doll within the Hunter's dream. And according to the lore aspects, Gammon actually fell in love with Lady Maria. Unfortunately, Lady Maria rejected those feelings, and thus Gammon made the doll out of those feelings of her, which I thought was interesting. Lady Maria was by far one of the best bosses, as well as one of the most unique ones within the game. Ever since Father Gascoigne, I always wanted more hunter bosses, and I think we can all agree that these are the best boss fights that we can look for throughout the entire game. I can only think of one other boss fight that could be better than Lady Maria, and I think we can all agree on which one that would be. And the number one spot for the top 10 Bloodborne bosses goes to...
Dear, oh dear. What was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gammon joins the hunt.
Gammon, the first hunter. You all pretty much knew right from the get-go that he would practically be the number one pick for top 10 bosses in Bloodborne. Mostly because of two reasons. One is that he's one of the more interesting characters within the game. We immediately encounter him when we first enter in the Hunter's Dream, and throughout our entire journey we always wonder about Gammon. Most of us usually go in deeper when it comes to the game, and we find out more details about him, including his past. And with the DLC itself, we find out more about Gammon than we ever thought possible. The fact that he knew about Ludwig, the fact he knew about Lawrence, the fact that he even knew about the creation of Bergamors, as well as everything else. Gammon himself has been haunted by the nightmares that he has seen himself. And by defeating the DLC portion of the game, we freed Gammon of those nightmares. He's actually one of the more interesting characters within the game. Gammon is even more interesting than Lord Gwyn himself from Dark Souls, which says a lot. Gammon may not be a master, and he doesn't consider himself as a master, but he is just considered to be the first hunter of the hunter race. And Gammon, well, one thing for certain, he definitely knows how to fight. The fighting style itself is amazing, and you cannot tell me that you enjoy fighting Gammon just for the fact that the style of the fight, the music, as well as the epicness of it all. He is just an amazing boss to encounter, and what's best of all is that he's not the final boss. He's technically not, when you consider the fact that he's an optional boss that you can fight. If for some reason you wanted to, you can avoid fighting him by basically surrendering, and he frees you from the dream itself, meaning that you are no longer restricted to return to the Hunter's Dream and now live a normal life as a hunter. If you choose to fight Gammon, however, after you defeat him, the moon present would automatically nominate you as the next hunter to lead all other hunters to their fates. However, if you absorb all 3 of the 4 umbilical cords, after you defeat Gammon, you'll fight Moon Presence, and therefore you become a Great One. That ending confused me somehow. I prefer the second ending myself, but what can you do? Gammon, you are by far the best boss in the game.
The night and the dream were long.
I mean, seriously, look at this pose. You cannot tell me that he is a badass. Hey folks, thank you for watching my top 10 favorite bosses within Bloodborne. I really enjoyed this game. I enjoy it even more than Dark Souls, and that says a lot. Bloodborne has been a very interesting game, as well as a very epic one as that, and I'm looking forward to Dark Souls 3 whenever it finally comes out. Also too, let me know in the description below if you would like to see more of any other games, or even any other top 10s that I might be doing. I will be doing a top 10 bosses within Dark Souls 2, but that won't be until I fully beat Dark Souls 2. Whenever I get to that point, that is. Also, too, I also plan on doing a PvP series of Bloodborne as well as Dark Souls 2 whenever I get a chance. So let me know in the description if you would like to, you know, fight me off in PvPing. I certainly would enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. And I've always said, take care, have a wonderful day, and may God bless you. Have a good one, guys.